I have no idea how Wednesdays became the official day for evictions in the Bay Area. Maybe it had something to do with the landlord filing on a Friday and thinking that would give their tenant an extra 2 days to line something up along the 17-hour notice that starts the following business day after being served. I was working in Noe Valley as a locksmith in 97, 98. Every Tuesday I would spend most of the day on the phone with landlords asking for quotes on evictions and if they had to supply their new locks, or could I just rekey them. I would explain that it really depended on the type of the job and the type of lock. They were super irate and exhausted people who wanted nothing more in life than to just move on. They mostly sounded worn out and tired of dealing with the courts, and when all was said and done, they were ready to just burn the building or the house down as soon as they got those sons of bitches out. I took their anger and asshole tone in stride, having the slightest bit of sympathy for them, even though I hated most landlords, having had more than one would ever want of slumlords in the 5 years I had been living in San Francisco. Their stories were outrageous, and I'd always swear at least once out of every 10 calls they were talking about one of my deadbeat friends. In fact, once I showed up on eviction day to find an old pal frantically jamming pillowcases with worthless crap in my eyes, but may have been treasures in theirs, as the sheriff was ordering them out in the next 5 minutes. I just pulled my hat down low over my eyes and got the deadbolts and the doorknobs off as fast as I could and rekeyed them in record time and got the hell out of there. We usually booked 3 to 6 evictions a Wednesday, sometimes more if we had a third locksmith on duty. 7, 9, 11 were the times we booked them. If anything went wrong, it would screw up the next appointment. It was my job to make sure there was enough time to get from one address to the next, so some wiggle room in case bullshit came up. But it was always very tense, never once did it go smoothly. I would be late, or the sheriff was. The landlord was always there early, no matter what. After all, they had sometimes been waiting over a year for this day to come. The day they rid the pain in the ass from their lives forever. There was always that one roommate who refused to leave. Nothing was packed, music was blaring, and every now and then an asshole dog was present, so we'd have to wait around for animal control to show up. Most of the time, the landlord would let the law speak for them, but every once in a while, a huge screaming match would break out. As I worked quickly to get the front door done and then roam around the house looking for any back doors or side doors to get taken care of so I could get the hell out of there. Around 1988, I started working for a company out in Walnut Creek. They mostly dealt with residential and auto work. Like San Francisco, Wednesdays was eviction day. This shop had a lot more people working for them, and so instead of just having 6 or 7, we would have like 20 on a super busy Wednesday. The calls out here for this type of service was a lot less drama than how it was in the city. Most of the time the property was cleared out and the door was left unlocked. All I had to do was wait for the sheriff to do a walkthrough and give me the okay for the place to be cleared for me to rekey everything. The sheriff was for the most part cheerful and pleasant to be around. Once in a while there would be a trashed place, but almost never were the people getting the boot were around. It got to the point where I looked forward to eviction days. The jobs were spread all over Contra Costa. Sometimes I would be gone all day on 5 jobs. It felt good having everything go so smoothly to the point where Wednesdays became very predictable. One Wednesday I got a call for a 9 a.m. eviction in Antioch, somewhere off Highway 4 around Bailey Road. My 7 a.m. went super smooth, leaving me time to get a cup of coffee and to get to the next one about 30 minutes early. I turned onto the street and spotted the house before I even had to look at the address. Sometimes you just know. The weeds in the grass was about 3 feet high, random patches of smashed grass and some random bag or pile of garbage. I imagined it was the house where everything just dumped and that was not picked up by the garbage trucks. There was about 6 motorcycles leaning up against the house on all sides of it. All the windows that I could see were busted out. Were busted out. They were covered with random pieces of wood and what looked like garbage bags hammered up from the inside. There was a long driveway that led to the backyard, and what looked like was a garage there, only there was no garage door. It was just rotten wood and a couple of springs. Inside the garage looked like an episode of Hoarders, boxes and garbages stacked up halfway to the ceiling. I started to think my luck had run out. My mellow days were over. Shit was about to get out of hand. This was when it was going to get ugly. It was about 8:45 when the front door started to move as if someone was pulling and tugging on it real hard to get it to open. Then it just fell back like it had fallen off the hinges. Two older biker-looking dudes walked out of the porch and lit a cigarette. I laughed to myself, thinking maybe it was a non-smoking household. An old Ford truck pulled up, and they threw some garbage bags in the back as the sheriff and the landlord pulled up. I approached the landlord, pushed past me, and started screaming at one of the biker dudes. He just stood there as the guy was screaming at him. One of the sheriffs pulled him back and tried to mediate through the whole thing. I went up to the front door and told the other guy to rekey the locks. He just ignored me. The front door was off the hinges and sitting next to the door frame. There was a big hole the size of maybe a close-range shotgun blast where the doorknob used to be. There was no door jamb to speak of, but there was multiple, like it had been damaged from multiple kick-ins. I figured I would just have to rehang the door and just put padlocks on it if the owners were too cheap to have it boarded up. The smell was the first thing I noticed. It was a cross between the city dump and a bar at closing time. There was a trash pile up maybe 2 feet everywhere I looked. I kicked some of it around as I walked around the living room. I could still hear the fighting going on out in the front yard as I walked around the house. There was 3 couches lined up, one blocking the doorway to the back where the bedrooms were. The other 2 seemed to be lined up in the corner with their backs to the front door as if it was sitting in them. You would be 3 feet from the wall. I could still see what was left of the flower wallpaper in one of the back bedrooms and the filthy walls. The kitchen was so gross I only managed to peek in from the doorway in fear of being mauled by millions of rats. I found it hard to believe that anyone was living there. It looked worse than any cracked-out squad shooting gallery I'd been in San Francisco during any warehouse evictions. I figured these guys were just looting the place, or whatever they could find, not actually living there. I was right, there were garbage bags nailed up over all the windows. I lit a cigarette and started pulling down the garbage bags to light up the place a bit. I started hearing some movement coming from the back of the house. I figured it was just mice or rats and kept pulling down bags to let more light in. Then I heard the sound like muffled grunting. I stopped what I was doing so I could try and figure out what the noise was. I peeked out the door and could see that one of the lady sheriffs had both men talking calmly, but the owner still looked super upset. I walked back to where the couch was blocking the back rooms and peeked in scared to step over and walk back there. The grunting got louder and more rustling was going on. I started to back out of the house as a big fat wild boar came running out from one of the bedrooms, slamming its head so hard against the couch it moved about 3 feet from the door. I was making room for it to get around it. I went running out of the house, jumping off the porch, yelling, "There's a wild boar in there, and look out." One of the sheriff ladies yelled, "What? They got wild whores in there?" And I jumped into the van and slammed the door and was peeking out and I was like, "No, they said wild boars. I got a big pig with big tusk things coming out of it." The owner put his head in his hands and the other sheriff kind of laughed. She told me the house with his wives and the guy living there was her son and his stepson. He had been living in the house for about 15 years, turning into a tweaker house, and keeping up with the bills and taxes. The owner's wife had passed away a few months back and was leaving the house in the name, giving him the right to finally kick the deadbeat son out. Me and one of the sheriffs sat around waiting for animal control to show up until finally the owner told me he decided to just pay someone to just come and board the place up. That's it.